The Handkerchief by Great 78. Chapter 125. Vagrants, Vaults, and Valuables. Draco lay in bed on the night of April 30th, his mind racing through possible scenarios for how tomorrow at Gringotts would play out for Hermione and the others. He lit his wand and spoke to his handkerchief. "Are you ready for tomorrow, my?" It was several minutes before she answered. Then she replied, "I think so. Ron is being very pernickety about his nose and hair." "Can you blame him? If I had that hair, I'd be pernickety too." "Ha ha. I'm going to bed soon, nervous about tomorrow. I'll let you know how it goes." A bit of unease settled over Draco. He hadn't told her that he planned to be at Gringotts as well. Finally he answered, "Please do. I love you, my." "I love you too, Draco." Draco awoke the next morning at 6:30. It had been a restless night of bad dreams, and he was glad to be awake, where at least he could affect what was going on around him. He showered and dressed in his most nondescript robes, tucking his handkerchief deeply inside the breast pocket. He wished Carlton and the birds a proper goodbye, and hurried downstairs with his bag for a bite to eat. He made 6 bacon and egg sandwiches, and stowed 4 of them away in the bag under a stasis charm, then hurriedly ate the other 2, hoping no one woke up to slow him down. Finally he stepped out the front door, still within the charms of the house, but out of his family's earshot, for his disapparition. Knockturn Alley was rather quiet and empty when he arrived in a small alley behind Borgin and Burke's. He checked his watch. 7:30. They should be arriving outside of the Leaky Cauldron about now. He disillusioned himself and stepped out into the open. Other than the occasional vagrant, the street was empty. It was the same in Diagon Alley, though the number of vagrants was far higher. Evidently they had standards of where they'd congregate to sleep, and for most of them Knockturn Alley just didn't make the cut. He hesitated outside the former ice cream parlor, which appeared to have been turned into a shop that sold protective jewelry and clothing to fearful people. Just ahead in the street was Bellatrix Lestrange, accompanied by a swarthy, bearded man with a short nose. This had to be Weasley. Potter and Griphook, as expected, were out of sight. He trailed along a short distance behind them, trying to blend into the background. Even disillusioned, he wasn't impossible to spot if someone was watching the area carefully. Suddenly one of the vagrants moved across the street to Hermione as Bellatrix. His eye was bandaged, his hair dirty, long, and ragged. His face under the bandage looked as though it had been carved up. There was something vaguely familiar about him in the loping gait. Draco moved a bit closer, and he could make out the man's voice, Scottish brogue, gravelly and angry. Hermione removed her wand, no, Bellatrix's wand, and stunned him. He fell away, crumpled upon the ground. From around a corner well ahead of the group bobbed a familiar figure. Too late he realized it was Travers. Travers, recognizing Bellatrix, called out to her. Hermione looked like an asswing confronted with a lantern, her face slackening in fear before turning haughty, even angry-looking. Travers spoke again, and Hermione seemed to listen to something in the air around her, before relaxing a bit. After a moment, Travers joined the group, and they stepped past the stunned man and continued towards Gringotts. Draco moved closer to the prone man, leaning down to examine him closely in the misty morning light. He was familiar, Draco was sure. If his hair were a bit different, his skin lighter, perhaps a bit heavier and less gaunt, Draco would almost swear that he knew him, under the dirty, ragged bandages. 2 other vagrants shifted towards the man, and Draco stepped back quietly. "Old nutter, I tell ya. He's half mad, you know. Doesn't remember his own name. Has some kind of magical accident months back, I think. Sometimes he's raving, going on about his family, all these kids he's got. Then he's telling you about how he used to be an Auror, catching dark wizards, and how he used to put Death Eaters in Azkaban." As they spoke, the 2 men gripped the unconscious vagrant under the arms, and dragged him out to the center of the street, leaning him up against the wall of an abandoned store. They walked away in disgust. Draco followed them closely to catch their words, drawing in a breath. Could this man, with his bandaged eye and scarred face, be Alistair Moody? Draco got closer now that they'd been left alone. It was entirely possible, but there was no way to be certain, and he did not have time to stand around and solve this mystery. He dug into his bag, removing a handful of galleons. He tucked them into the wizard's pocket. Then, as an afterthought, he considered the charmed galleons. He removed one from his bag and used his wand to cut a small hole in the seam of the man's robes. He tucked the galleon into the hole, then repaired it. The matching one he marked with an A and added it to the ones in his pocket. Then he removed a bit of parchment from his bag and wrote quickly, "Find the charmed coin in your robe seam. Hold it in your hands to speak, then read the edge when it heats up." It was all Draco could do. He'd have no other way of finding this man once he left. He looked up. Hermione, Weasley, and Travers were at the top steps of Gringotts, Travers going ahead of the other two. Draco sprinted to catch up. "But you've just done that!" Hermione snapped in Bellatrix's voice at one of the security wizards at the door. Both of the wizards wore the unmistakable expressions of the recently confounded. Draco hurried past them whilst they were still in their current state. In his haste he felt a brush of fabric against his leg that should not have been there. He realized with quick horror that it was likely Potter, who could no more see Draco than Draco could see him. He fell back from them, resolving to give their group more space. Hermione and Weasley were expecting an invisible Potter. They were not expecting a second invisible wizard, and it would likely scare them all if he got too close again. He moved back to a wall to watch the group. There seemed to be some concern for a moment about the wand that Hermione carried, but both the goblin inspecting it and then Travers were suddenly agreeing that this wand was acceptable. Other goblins seemed more uncertain, and were hurrying to the group now. But the first goblin had grabbed a bag of what sounded like metal tools, and was leading the group away, closely followed by the concerned goblins. Draco cast his favourite sticking jinx on the following goblin's feet, giving Hermione's group a bit of a head start, off to the vaults. Travers followed at a short distance. As he turned a bit, Draco saw his slack-jawed face. He'd been imperious. He followed Travers closely. Draco just made it into the stone passageway leading to the vaults with their group as the doors slammed close. Potter yanked off the invisibility cloak, and the goblin sitting on his hunched shoulders slid down his back. "We're in trouble. They suspect," said Potter. Hermione and the disguised Weasley gestured frantically to the other goblin and Travers, but Potter explained. "They're imperious. I don't think I did it strong enough. I don't know." "What do we do?" Weasley asked. "Shall we get out of here, whilst we can?" Draco fought against a snort of annoyance. Ready to run at the first sign of an obstacle again, he thought. "If we can," said Hermione. She looked back with a worried expression at the lobby behind the doors. "We've gotten this far. I say we go on," Potter decided. Griphook looked excited. "Good. So, we need Bogred to control the cart. I no longer have the authority. But there will not be room for the wizard." Draco startled, thinking the goblin meant him, but then he remembered the silent Travers standing a bit away from them, staring at the wall behind them. "Imperio!" Potter cast a second curse at the wizard, and Travers turned and took off down a side corridor. "What are you making him do?" Weasley asked. "Hide," said Potter. Griphook pointed at the waiting cart, and the group jumped in and rocketed away. Well, shit. He was stuck here now. He thought a moment. Accio Travers! In a moment, from the side corridor, the whizzing sound of a flying man hurtling towards him was clear. Draco caught sight of him just as he moved back into the light. "Arresto momentum!" Draco cried in a loud whisper. The speeding wizard stopped moving so quickly that his hair flew into his face. Draco snatched a few hairs from the wizard's scalp. Travers didn't flinch or look at where the invisible Draco should be. Go back and hide again. Travers hurried off a second time. Draco dug into his bag, fumbling a bit before he remembered that he knew magic. Axiopolyjuice. It zoomed into his hand, and he poured a bit into his cup. He dropped in the hairs, watching as it turned a dark blood red. Gross. Sighing, Draco downed it in one and removed the disillusionment charm. He looked down, feeling his skin bubbling and melting, gut paunching a bit. Here goes nothing, he thought. He pushed the doors open again, catching the attention of a goblin rushing by. "Excuse me, I simply must get into my vault. That last fellow said there was no room in his cart."
"Sorry, Mr. Travers, we're a bit busy."
"Too busy to take care of a valued customer?"
Draco barked.
"Oh, of course not, sir."
The goblin was joined by 2 other goblins, and one of the security wizards, still shaking his head in confusion. A handful more followed. The group split into 2 and piled into 2 carts, Draco's in the lead. As they hurtled down the track, Draco saw a suspicious-looking waterfall ahead, but a goblin waved a hand as they approached, and the water changed directions swiftly. They careened around a corner and screeched to a sudden halt. A greyish-white mass in front of them roared loudly, belching fire. He suddenly realized that all the rumors he'd heard about the beasts under the ground at Gringotts were likely true. Here was living, fire-breathing proof. Everyone in the cart cast whatever shield charms they could, but the heat still felt as though it singed the hairs on the back of Travers' hands. The goblins jumped out of the 2 carts, brandishing bags similar to the ones carried by the wizard that had helped Hermione and the others. They shook the bags, and a loud clanking sound reverberated throughout the space. The dragon ahead shrank back a bit. The goblins moved closer, and the clanking sound pushed the dragon back even more. Finally, one of the bag-wielding goblins was close enough to the Lestrange vault to press their hand to the door. The door burst open, knocking over the goblin, who was swallowed by a rolling wave of gold? Yes, glittering gold, silver, pewter, gemstones, in all manner and form, were being expelled forcefully into the landing. Goblets, coins, jewelry, pressed bars, crowns, helmets, and suits of armor, all of it cascaded and rolled, and amidst it, covered in what looked like blisters and welts, was the Gryffindor trio and Griphook. The other goblin was unconscious, and Hermione appeared to be trying to levitate him out. Hermione, not Bellatrix, he thought wildly, and Weasley was himself as well. Griphook ran awkwardly with his hands to his sides, hurrying to Draco's group and shouting, "Thieves! Thieves! Help!" Then Hermione, Potter, and Weasley got to their hands and knees, then their feet, with great effort. They were slipping here and there on the copious treasure, spilling everywhere, trying to hide behind support beams. They fired curses at the group, who aimed the same back at them. Draco disillusioned himself and edged along the wall, sizing up the situation. It was 3 against nearly a dozen, and Draco could hear distant shouts coming from the tracks, meaning more were on their way. Not to mention, the 3 of them already looked as though they'd lost a fight with the flaming torch. But wait, there were 4 against a dozen, and the additional 1 counted for a whole lot more than 1. And since the goblins from the carts had dropped the clanking bags, she seemed a lot more amenable to fighting. Just then, as if to prove his point, she roared again, belching fire. Draco turned to the 3 Gryffindors. Hermione was focused on the fight, every bit of her attention taken by firing hexes and generating a shield charm for herself and the small goblin she was covering. Weasley, too, was looking for ways to take out the advancing wizards, sending curses and hexes their way. But Potter was firing hexes at the far group, whilst looking all around him for a means of escape. Take the dragon, he thought, focusing his mind in Potter's direction. "Unleash it, and get on its back." Draco could tell when the idea finally struck the other wizard. His entire face changed from panicked to incandescent, the flame of the idea taking hold like fiend fire, and spurring him into action. Potter yelled, "Relatio!" The manacles flew off the beast's legs, but it didn't move. Potter ran to it, climbing up using the scales as a ladder. Draco moved a bit closer to the group. Hermione scuttled over to a place where Potter had climbed up the dragon's back, and began hesitantly climbing. Weasley pushed himself up after her. The dragon did not move. "Go!" Draco thought, but the dragon stayed resolutely put, despite its lack of shackles. In a moment of panic, Draco fired a stinging jinx at the dragon's aged feet. It reared up, its scaly back where Hermione and the others clung, scraping the roof with the tips of its scales. But the dragon was moving now, lumbering slowly towards the horde of goblins and wizards, who were retreating quickly. Draco could see Hermione firing spells at the walls of the tunnel, enlarging it as they went. The dragon seemed to know where to go, in spite of likely having been chained here for years. With a distant crash and bang, Draco heard the doors back into the lobby bang open. There was a roar of fire, then a spectacular crash of what was, unmistakably, a chandelier hitting the marble floor. They were out. Chapter 126. Dagger and Drinks. Draco looked around the vault corridor, deep in the bowels of Gringotts, in the aftermath of the dragon's departure. Most of the wizards and goblins had scattered. The ones still alive were stirring from their hiding places. The place was surely going to be crawling with people, Death Eaters and ministry officials most likely, in a matter of minutes. There was already a lot of shouting from past the blasted doors that separated the vault from the lobby. He needed to get out of here quickly. He focused on the destination of the alley behind Borgin and Burke's, and twisted on the spot. Nothing happened. The anti-apparition wards around the bank were still holding, despite the gaping hole in the bank's entrances. Still disillusioned, Draco thought for a moment before he withdrew his Nimbus 2001 from his bag. He tried disillusioning it as well, but the broom would not hold the enchantment. Oh well, he thought. It might look odd, a broom flying on its own. But it could not look any more odd than a half-blind dragon with 3 people clinging to its back. Draco mounted his broom, keeping as close to the wall as he could to avoid the crowd of goblins and wizards lying dead or disorientated below. But as he passed, a glint of something, silvery and slightly familiar, shone up at him. He willed himself to ignore it. He had to get out before Lord Voldemort was summoned. But it caught in his brain like a snag in a jumper. "Ah, fuck," he whispered to himself, circling back and landing lightly, a bit away from whatever it was that he'd seen. He crept back, slowly, invisibly, to it. There! The blade was covered by a stunned goblin. It was Griphook, who had double-crossed Hermione and the others, but with its ruby-encrusted handle and goblin-made metalwork, the sword of Gryffindor was unmistakable. Damn it. Potter needed this sword to destroy any future Horcruxes. Draco levitated the goblin just a bit, yanking the sword loose. He held it for a moment aloft, lost in the mystery and pageantry of the beautiful sword. Then, as a nearby wizard began to push himself into a seated position, Draco opened his extended bag and pushed the sword inside. He ran back to his broom and kicked off again, zooming down the tunnel, through the large, blasted hole where the doors to the lobby used to stand. The entrance to Gringotts itself was a sea of glittering crystal. A handful of goblins and wizards stood about, dazed, staring either at the hole to the vaults, or at the hole that used to be the doors, out to diagonally. These, too, had been blasted away, leaving crumbled rock and debris everywhere. 1 or 2 of those on the ground caught sight of his broom, and turned to bring it to someone else's attention, but by the time they turned back to point it out, Draco was long gone. He surged up, as soon as he had cleared the doorway. Circling a bit above Diagon Alley, he decided upon the leaky which had a widow's walk along its roof. He strengthened his disillusionment charm and removed his handkerchief from his pocket. Vinca Major! Hermione, are you okay? Where are you? There was no answer. He had expected none. But hopefully soon she would be off the back of that dragon, and she'd see his message. Tucked up high on the widow's walk, unseen by passers-by below, Draco watched the street below as he ate another bacon and egg sandwich. Several vagrants and more than a few curious witches and wizards walked up to the hole that was the doors of Gringotts, interestedly. All were turned away brusquely by the 2 goblins and the wizard, acting as security. After about 5 minutes, a small group of Death Eaters arrived, zooming in and flying on brooms past the paltry security contingent. 20 minutes later, they flew out again. 2 flew with Griphook and the small goblin that Hermione had tried to protect, who had taken them in the cart initially. Another had Travers, bound and gagged. A 4th and 5th carried the security guard wizards, also trussed up. They landed just outside the entrance to the bank, and disapparated with their quarry. Draco felt a bit sick for them, knowing that the Cruciatus and killing curses were very likely in their future, once their minds were picked clean. An hour passed. Then 2. It was just after midday. How long was this dragon going to fly, and how far? He wondered. He considered apparating back to the Tonks' residence, but they knew that he had planned to leave for something important and dangerous. If he came back so quickly, they might try to convince him to stay put. 4 more hours, and another bacon and egg sandwich later, Draco was beginning to get well and truly worried. It had been about 6 hours since they left. Surely they would not be able to hold on to a dragon for that long. Their arms would grow tired. Unbidden, images of Hermione falling through the sky from a great height, wind whipping at her hair, and the ridiculous robes that she wore as Bellatrix, reaching for her wand only for the wind to rip it from her grip. No, that was not going to happen. They would be fine. They had to be fine. Draco dozed fitfully, waking suddenly when he felt wetness in his pocket. The handkerchief, which had been lying perfectly unchanged for several hours, was suddenly soaking wet. Draco sat up, panicked. Had the blasted beast made it out to open sea? He brought the handkerchief to his nose, but the water smelled not at all salty, more brackish and mossy. It was decidedly a greenish-brown tinge, as though it came from a bog-standard lake, not the ocean. Draco breathed a sigh of relief that was short-lived. She could be knocked out, attacked and dragged under by Grindylows. What was it that Blaise was always saying down by the Black Lake about watery tots and strange women lying in ponds? Did he mean mer-people, or some kind of water banshee? Draco had never thought to ask, because Blaise always seemed to find the idea amusing. But now Draco was imagining all sorts of fierce creatures. "Hermione, please, love, answer me. Are you all right?" Still no answer. His mind raced, trying to decide what to do. He could apparate to her, hoping that his presence would not cause Potter and Weasley to hex him into oblivion on the spot, before she could vouch for him. He could apparate whilst disillusioned, perhaps. The handkerchief was suddenly, magically dry. He exhaled his relief as nearly a sob. She wasn't knocked out, then, and likely hadn't been attacked. She still had a wand with which to perform magic. He took several deep breaths, and then both the handkerchief and a coin in his pocket warmed. He checked the handkerchief first. "We are safe. Not sure where. Harry is in a fugue state, similar to after the snake bite in Godric's Hollow. It's been going on for a few minutes. Ron is with him. I told Ron I needed to check the wards again. Harry is seeing some awful things, though, from the sounds of it. We got the cup, but we lost the sword. I don't know what we'll do next. We may camp here tonight." he wrote back eagerly. "Thank Merlin, I was so worried. Seeing you on the back of that dragon, I kept worrying you might fall off." Her reply was quick. "How did you—" But her words cut off. "I was there, disillusioned in case you needed me." There was a long stretch of silence. Had she been annoyed at him, checking up on her, thinking they couldn't handle the situation alone? Or had she only been interrupted by Weasley or Potter? "Hermione, I apologize, love. I didn't mean to bother you by doing that. I was only worried about you." Still more silence. Then her reply. "But what did you see? How do you know?" He answered with confusion. "I've just told you I was there." Her next message was even more cryptic. Oh, wait, we can't just go. We haven't got a plan. We need to—" What? Then he realized she was speaking to someone else. The handkerchief warmed again. "But how are we going to get in?" Where was she trying to get in to? Hadn't they just broken out of a place? Now they were going to another place in which they had no way to enter. It was sunset. Where could they possibly be headed? Weren't they going to camp, wherever they were? "Where are you going?" he asked, but the response made no sense. "But we don't really fit." He asked again. "Where are you going?" Silence. "Granger," he growled, both to wipe clean the handkerchief and to express his frustration with his headstrong, fearless, foolhardy witch. He strengthened his disillusionment, focused on the handkerchief, the dried lake water still saturated into the fibers of the handkerchief, and disapparated. Just as he felt his feet touch the ground, he heard a crack from a distance, several yards away. He whipped about, searching the lake shores, but saw no one. Hurrying to where he had heard the crack, he found the boggy marsh grasses near the edge of the lake flattened in a space. There was a saturated spot on the ground where the three of them had likely stood or laid down for a time. He sniffed a faint scent of pumpkin juice, familiar from his years at Hogwarts. Apparently she'd had some in her beaded bag, and one of them had spilled a bit on the ground. They'd been here, but where were they now? Back out came the handkerchief. "Hermione, I was worried, so I came to the lake that the handkerchief was soaked in, presumably from when you jumped off the dragon. I think I just missed you. Where are you now?" There was, as he expected, no answer. She'd asked the others how they were going to get in. Where had they gone? The Ministry again. Back to the bank. Hogwarts. St. Mungo's. Each idea seemed more ludicrous. His dark mark burned suddenly. His heart seemed to stop, wondering what it was all about. Then he realized that he knew exactly what it was all about. He felt a bit sick. Not answering this summons was tantamount to treason. It was as good as an open declaration of defiance, he feared. He remembered his coin that had warmed at the same time as the handkerchief. He dug the small pile of galleons frantically from his trouser pocket. It was his mother's coin. "Goblins and wizards from Gringotts were brought here. Sounds like the Cruciatus." He sighed. It was what he had assumed. He wrote back, "Sorry. Got a note from her at the same time as yours. How are things now?" Narcissa wrote back, "Group from the bank were all tortured or dead. Killed one of his own men that brought them in, too. Travers barely escaped. Bella tortured, too. They broke into her vault. V is angry. I think he knows." Well, fuck. Draco's stomach felt like ice water. He had assumed that this was coming, Lord Voldemort learning what was happening, but it made it no easier to accept. An image of Griphook lying stunned but alive on top of the sword came to his mind. Damn it. He'd forgotten to tell Hermione about having the sword. He took out the handkerchief again, about to speak the password to open it, but then hesitated. Both Hermione and Snape had told him that the sword came to worthy Gryffindors in a time of need, under heroic circumstances. Hermione had relayed in detail Potter's heroics in the Chamber of Secrets. Was a Slytherin taking it from a stunned goblin and just giving it to them in any way heroic? It was a magical artifact. If it was passed along without the requisite heroism, would it simply vanish? Return itself to its rightful place inside Hogwarts, where presumably it had been until Snape had brought it to Potter the months before. He pushed his hands into his rucksack, reassuring himself with a grip to the sword's hilt that it was still there. It hadn't vanished, despite the fact that a Slytherin had essentially nicked it from a goblin. But he had taken it from someone who had tricked his way into possessing it, a small voice piped up in his mind. Draco had taken it back not to keep, but for a bigger purpose than personal gain. Taking it from the goblin to return to a few Gryffindors, the rightful possessors might even be seen as a bit heroic, hence why it hadn't yet disappeared. His Slytherinness firmly rejected this notion. He needed to think. The coin connected to Narcissa warmed again. "Did they find one?" He wrote back to his mother. "They got it. Not sure where they are now, though." "How did they escape? One of the Death Eaters that wasn't in the room with them said that Gringotts looked as though a muggle bomb had gone off in there. Did they bring in a muggle device?" "No. They rode a dragon out." There was a long pause. Then his mother replied, "Well, it must have been quite a show." He responded, "You can't imagine the half of it." He paced the lake bank for a few moments in an attempt to clear his mind. If Hermione was not able to answer, perhaps someone else that he was in touch with might know where she was. Perhaps she'd gone back to Shell Cottage. He took out his small coin collection. His mother was out, as he had just spoken to her, and besides, he didn't think even Potter was stupid enough to go to Malfoy Manor voluntarily. Blaise and Theo were at school, likely finishing dinner in the Great Hall, or else hanging out in the library or the Slytherin common room. He doubted that they knew of Hermione and the others' whereabouts. Professor Snape certainly didn't know where they were. This left Ginny and Remus. Remus was in the Order, but it might take him some time to communicate with the others through the Flu network, and Draco did not think the 3 Gryffindors wanted more people knowing their business, anyway. Ginny might be the best option. She knew how Potter thought, and Weasley was her brother. She might know of a place they would have gone. It was worth a try. He plucked up her coin, returning the others to his pocket. "I'm looking for Hermione and the others. I was with them earlier, but I've lost them. Have you heard from them? Ideas where they might go?" Her reply came almost at once.
"Tell me where you are, and I'll meet you."
That's another problem. I have no idea where I am. Followed her here, but they're gone. Hang on, let me try something." He dipped his copy of her coin into the clear pool of water, but could tell immediately that this wouldn't work. Unlike the handkerchief, which absorbed the liquid, the water just beaded on the surface of the coin. He wrote back, "Didn't work. Can I come to you?"
"At Muriel's? You do not want to come here. My aunt will tell you that your chin is too pointy."
She seems unnecessarily fixated on wrongly sized features.
"Yes, apparently my lips are too full."
Too full for what?
Wait, maybe she just said my mouth was too big because I talk back to her too much.
Yes, that does seem more likely.
Okay, if you want to come, there's a wizarding pub in Dunsford called the Poison Ivy. Apparate there, and order me a rhubarb gin and tonic."
Draco narrowed his eyes. Was this just the Weaselette's way of getting out of her aunt's house for a drink? Possibly, but he found he didn't care. Fine. But if we're going to a wizarding pub, I can't be recognized. I will have black hair.
Ooh, we're doing disguises. All right, I'll be blonde.
Thank you for listening to this chapter of The Handkerchief by Great78.